Welcome everybody, thanks for coming out to our session. We're going to be talking today about a project we did for Georgia Gwinnett College. I'll be talking a little bit about the strategy of the project, and Rich will be talking about how we took that larger product strategy and adapted it in the technology decisions that were made. So, let me get my clicker. So I'm Bernice Carey-Davis, and I'm a senior digital strategist at Evolving Web.
And I'm Rich Lawson. I'm an associate director of technology at Evolving Web.
So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
A little bit about us, by the way. I know you're here. Maybe you've heard of us. Just kidding. I know you probably have. But we work with some really great clients. We're full service, and we're just really excited to be able to share this project. So who is Georgia Gwinnett College, or as you'll hear me call them, GGC. They're a four-year college, and they were founded in 2006. So when you think about institutions, and even some of those in Boston, right, fairly new. And in that time, they've also had major growth. They're located in Lawrenceville. It's about an hour outside of Atlanta. And their focus really is to try to create an accessible education that, one, targets career-ready degrees, right? So folks can go straight into the workforce afterwards. And they really want to become a premier 21st century, right, liberal arts college. They focus on giving a lot of support and attention so students who enroll actually succeed, and affordability and access. So our strategic approach to the site, we did some research, we put all these inputs together, and then we realized that we wanted the approach that we took into their new site as we were redesigning it and some other things to focus on this idea of democratizing education, right? They are big believers that regardless of the experience you had in high school or whatnot, this is a place where you can come and learn and transform your life. We had to look at their current site, right? And there were some issues that we noticed, or opportunities that we could take as we made a new one. So one was to make it clear why prospects should choose GGC. Two was to highlight the support offered to students, because that was a big part of when we talked to people, what stood out to them about the college. And then also help prospects, right, see themselves reflected at GGC. So first, let's make it clear why prospects should choose GGC, right? So when we talk to students, right, prospective students, we asked them, what do you take into account when you're selecting a college? And these were the things that we heard, right? Cost, affordability, program choices, student life, and proximity to home. But we also asked not just the college decision as a whole, but specifically about why did GGC stand out to you, right? Why pick GGC in this crowded landscape? And proximity of campus to home, affordability, program choices, and community aspects like campus safety and diversity were really huge. GGC has been named for 11 years straight the most diverse regional college in the South, and that's really, really impressive. So what we saw, this is the old site, right? You get here and you don't really get to find out what they're about, right? So there's a value proposition that's kind of missing on this homepage. And we really want to see how it's different from its competitors. And they had a great tagline, but it wasn't enough to carry the message. So you get a sneak peek of the new design. This is not launched yet, so you really do get a sneak peek. But we instead wanted to bring in, right, a design that was really impactful and motivational and really empowering. And we wanted to make sure that the content also delivered on that, right? So some of the key differentiators that we identified through our research, like location, or one that I think was really interesting that a lot of students brought up, is the fact that you don't have to share a dorm. You get your own dorm, there's no communal bathrooms, you just share it with one person, right? And when you get into the mindset of folks who are considering this as an institution, those are the things that are important to them. Now, we made programs easier to find, and we also saw that affordability was a key differentiator, but it wasn't front and center, right? So when I reach the financial aid page, there's a little stat there, but GGC actually offers the lowest tuition bachelor's degree amongst all of the university system of Georgia schools in the metro Atlanta area, and it's a crowded market, so that's a big differentiator for them that they weren't really championing in a lot of their pages. And so we did something about that, right? And Rich will talk about some more of the technical sides of this, but we really wanted to make those resources easy to find, including revamping the tuition calculator that they had to have some conditional fields and things that, instead of overwhelming users with information, they would click on, if they click no to living on campus, then they don't have to go through what all the different rooms available to them are. But if they do, then they're shown those options. And we also saw that, as I said, a lot of their programs are designed for practical career readiness, but a lot of the program pages, what you see here to the side, are very text heavy, and it's really hard to see, okay, great, what can I do with this, right? Where do I go next? And so we really wanted to change that. So we introduced new design and really content and kind of outcomes-driven content, right? You can see different career stats. We tried to highlight, if you're a student here, what do the courses actually look like? We then also wanted to highlight the support offered to students. So somebody who we spoke to said, people are really surprised that in the price of tuition, which if you remember is the lowest in the area, you also can get mental health counseling, there's some medical care, career services, free tutoring on any topic, and so it was really important that this message was shown, So in the information architecture, we added content for this, where all of these kind of different points, instead of being spread throughout the site, are centralized, and a prospective student can see everything that's included. And then last, we wanted to help prospects see themselves at GGC, So the campus setting is a huge selling point for GGC. One of our stakeholders says if we can get them to visit campus because it's so beautiful, we can convince them to attend, So we needed to be able to do that and create opportunities for people to actually get to the CTAs that are calling for them to register. And we also wanted to add authentic student experiences. So between videos and real people's experiences to leveraging testimonials, we really wanted to make sure that those voices were represented.
Great. Thanks, Bruna. So up next, we'll talk a little bit about the technical discovery that we went through for the new GGC site. In terms of the technical discovery, I'd like to dig into the process a little bit. So there were two major areas of focus that we used and focused on. Understanding the current site and new requirements for the redesign, and planning and prioritizing the requirements and functionality of the new site. So from a collaboration perspective, it was really, really helpful to us that members of the GGC team were developers, because that enabled us to more closely collaborate with them on some of the different technical details of the site and get a little bit more insight. After our initial assessment, we also worked closely with the GGC editorial team in terms of the different requirements that they had for migrations. We were able to work through details with the tech team on single sign-on, integrations, DevOps and infrastructure, custom modules, documentation, and training. So it was really helpful. We also identified different opportunities and risks. So for example, we discussed web form submissions and what the considerations and implications would be surrounding data privacy and security. And we also focused on site sections, which had been very challenging for the editorial team on the current site. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we really focus on those in terms of coming up with a better approach. Next, we provided an analysis of the different calculators that they had, like the tuition calculator that you just heard about that Bruna showed you, and the custom modules. And we were able to determine that we would be able to reduce the technical complexity and simplify and leverage contributed modules much more closely. And we were able to reduce technical debt in that way and simplify the approach and really make things better. So one example of that is the Access custom module that they had, where we were able to replace that with the much more robust group module. And not only did it provide some standardization and leverage things that the Drupal community as a whole uses, but it also had additional functionality. And I'll talk a little bit more about those site sections here in a few minutes. One of the major focal points for our planning and prioritizing was on components that are used to build the pages on the site. So one of the shared activities that our technical team had with the design team is to go through and do an inventory of all of the existing components on the site. Not only did this help us to understand the current content structure better, but we were also able to map existing components to the new components that we wanted to use. Documenting all of that current behavior and characteristics helped us during conversations with the editorial team at GGC to understand where there were gaps and opportunities for us to improve things. And in some cases, components were going to stay mostly the same, where it was basically a fairly straightforward direct mapping of fields, whereas in other cases we had to create completely new components because of different nuances in terms of the way that we needed things to work on the new site. So one example of that would be for the degree content type that we created. We needed to make sure that for the program finder component that we had a new offerings field. And so we needed to be able to track that. But then there were some other fields on there that just didn't make sense anymore. Like there was a start dates field that we just weren't going to use anymore. So we were mapping all that out. We also identified cases in which there would be entirely new components. So examples of that would include the testimonial card, which would bring campus voices to the site in a much more personable way. And we also were reworking how we would handle latest news and the component that we built for that. After we mapped the components, we also decided to take advantage for the new site of using single directory components, or SDCs. They weren't a part of core when the original site had been built. And so we were able to basically simplify managing and creating of new components by taking advantage of that approach. And there are a number of different reasons why that's a really great idea. One is that the usage of the SDCs has really become a standard practice with Drupal. And it basically means that you no longer have your code separated into a number of different locations. Things become a lot more centralized. And it also makes it a lot easier to find things and to replicate and build new components, particularly if you have a component that you can use as kind of a baseline, something similar for a new component that you will build. Moving on from components, one of the key requirements for the new site was to better highlight the degrees and programs. So as is often the case with higher education sites, the program finder is really key to the experience of future students who will be using the site. And so in discussing with the GGC team, we completely reimagined it from what they had on the existing site. We decided that it was really important to prioritize the relationship between the degrees and the programs. And so, in doing that, we also were able to add a lot of different filters and enhance the functionality of the new program finder tool. So we had things like keyword search, program type, locations, areas of study, and schools. So you can imagine that if you're a potential, a future student who is going to go to GGC, it would be great to be able to filter things out and really focus on the areas of study and the school that you are thinking about attending. And then for a bit better usability, we also added in majors, minors, and other key differentiators that would be able to interest and entice the prospective students. Another challenging aspect of the project for GGC had to do with content moderation. So if you take a look at the slide there, you'll see that this is a very simple, kind of a straightforward flow that you would often see on other Drupal sites or really any CMS platform that you might take a look at. And so I'm not going to dive into the details here. And actually, when we just look at this approach, it works really, really well for GGC. But we started to see some complexity once we factored in that there's editorial controls that would be necessary across the different site sections. So you might be wondering, why does GGC need these different site sections on the site? Basically, what we were seeing is that they really needed to be able to have their different campus units be involved in that editorial process in order to participate and through their approvals and everything that would need to happen. So if we look at admissions as an example, it would need to have its own section of the site, and that would be separate from the student success section that GGC has. So what we decided to do is, like I mentioned before, we wanted to use the group module to create the different sections. And so now I'd like to talk a little bit about the impact on moderation that had. So in order to better control access to content moderation for these different site sections, there were two different categories that we were taking a look at in terms of the content moderation roles that we needed. One for members of the communications team and one for the campus editorial team members. So if you're a member of the GGC communications team, you need to be able to jump into content moderation at any point and basically, modify or participate in that moderation for that section of the site. So if we think of admissions again, as an example, the communications team might need to review a new landing page for an email marketing campaign in the admissions section before it goes live. Unlike the communications team, however, the admissions team would just need to be able to have access and participate in content moderation for their own section of the site. So in other words, it's just really they're dealing with their own content. So what did that mean for the complexity of the way that we set up the permissions and user roles? So the permissions for the communications team were relatively straightforward because we were able to globally grant them access to the relevant sections, all sections of the site. And so it was just a global change. But for the individual campus units and their editorial members, like admissions, for example, it would require that they have a global editor role that would provide them access to the different, stages of the content moderation and review, for example, so that they basically would be able to access that, and then we were able to be more targeted with the sections to where they were able to control the content within their own site section. One of the nice things about this is that even though there's some complexity here, we can also use that to make it to where if admissions needs to be able to edit, student success in that section of the site, you can add them to that as well. So it's very extensible, and it makes it to where we don't have to do a lot of rework or anything in order to provide that. And so that gives GGC themselves the ability to grant editor access across all of these different sections in a very straightforward manner. So moving on from content moderation, we also developed a content migration plan with GGC as part of this technical discovery process. So during discovery, we focused on the content migration efforts that surrounded the review and plan stages that you see highlighted on the slide there. And what we were doing is basically we reviewed the content and thought up how it would map to new updated content types and components. And as we did that, we wanted to make sure we documented that and shared it in a way that would be understandable to the GGC team. So we created something called a data transfer table, or DTT, and that pulls all of the different findings together. It tracks both the sources on the existing site as well as the destinations on the new site, and it makes it to where we can, in a very straightforward way, be able to talk those things through and determine, what it is exactly that the needs are. So we were able to perform a full inventory of all of the different content on the site, including the different content types, media, taxonomy terms, and everything else that was content related on the site. And then we used the DTT to answer questions like, how is the content structured and how complex is it? How much content is there really? Because that helps to determine whether or not you want to do an automatic content migration, or if you want to do something manual, or in some cases there are just pieces of content or types of content that you're not going to want to bring over at all. So as an example of that, if there's only 30 published pieces of content, in a particular type, it probably doesn't make sense to automatically migrate that unless there's a lot of complexity in terms of the metadata and fields that are surrounding that particular type of content. Our team started by documenting all of these different details and having a working session with GGC to collaboratively make sure that we were determining exactly what that should look like before we spent a lot of time on working through all the details. And we were also able to come up with ways of supporting GGC with the actual content creation itself as part of that process, which was really good. All right, so that covers the details of the technical discovery collaboration with GGC. So development is progressing really well. You can see a little bit more, of like the way that the site will look here soon, because it's going to be launching next month in July. And so you can feel free to reach out and get in touch with us. And we can also have. I think we're kind of at time, but if anybody has a quick question or two, we could definitely answer for you. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Any questions?
It's really interesting the content type of degrees. I hadn't thought of it that way, but are super important. Did that get into Was it someone that brought it to you, or was it something that sort of came up based on user research? How did you get to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, they had these degrees that we really needed to like highlight in a really meaningful way. And there's important things people need to know, right? The cost, for example, we knew that was something important, and that's by credit hour. So different majors have different requirements. And so these were the types of things that we wanted to be really thoughtful about. And because we wanted to pull all of those individual degrees into that kind of, in this case, like Drupal view, right, of the Finder, having a separate content type that can be, I think, really specific and really geared and even look a little bit different, right? Because we know, too, from research that a lot of the time when somebody's looking for a higher education institution, right, when they're going somewhere, a lot of that first step that prospects take is to actually just say, okay, I'm interested in X. Does this place even have anything like that? And so, anyways, I think that was we knew that that was one of the key moments of the site, and it made sense to, both from a design perspective, but also how information is inputted, to be slightly different so that it could pull into that view. Thank you.
Okay, well, I think we're at time, so thanks again, everybody.
Thank you.